Hi there, Dan Kerrs, DK Analytics. Thanks for tuning in. It is August 16th, 2017. We wanted to do a follow-up video of sorts on the video, rather lengthy one that we put out 2 days ago. And it's an addendum of sorts, and we think you'll soon see why and why we think it's worthy of mention given the trajectory of things. But before we get there, I just wanted to spend a minute or two on the U.S. Q2 real GDP growth rate of 2.6%, and that surprising vigor being supported by relatively robust consumer spending despite an implosion in the retail arena in terms of store closing, chain bankruptcies, and the like. And let's not forget the heavily gimmicked U.S. GDP number has other inflationary aspects in it in terms of pushing the real rate of growth higher, not the least of which is a heavily understated inflation rate. But for the sake of this video, let us pick out this the consumer as backstory and take it for a little trip to the woodshed, meaning it's not sustainable going forward. Specifically, we know that there are over 94 million Americans of working age that are not in the labor force. We know that the labor force participation rate is at a near 4-decade low. We know that a lot of the payroll job growth, if not the vast majority, has been in part-time, lower-paying positions that don't offer benefits. We also know that the U.S. continues to hemorrhage high-paying, high-value-added manufacturing jobs. We also know that U.S. consumer debt, private debt, held by consumers, is back up to a new record, over 18 trillion in aggregate when counting all kinds of debt that are tethered to a consumer. And this is despite a consumer which owns, or the average person, home ownership rates are near a 2-decade low. So it's without a massive expansion in mortgages that this has taken place. Think student loans, think car loans, and the like. And it also is a relatively robust consumer spending rate that is in absolute contrast to what is happening to, you probably guessed it, the private savings rate. All right. And let me see if I can grab a chart to show this better. This is dating all the way back to the 60s, courtesy of the Federal Reserve. Before I try to show the chart, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, U.S. consumers regularly saved 10% or more of their income. The last indication here in June of 17, we're down to 3.6%. From 5.1% in June of 16. So we're heading south. What is our takeaway? The debt is up, the jobs are down, the good jobs are down, the workforce participation rate is down, the manufacturing capacity of the country is a fraction of what it was. So how is, if consumption is allegedly 67 to 70% of GDP, how is this going to stay strong amidst all that? Too much debt, too little jobs, and a personal saving rate which is plummeting, which is something that obviously can't be dipped into in the future, right? Doesn't have legs. So let me see if I can show you this. Give me a little bit of, or give, dear viewers, give me a little bit of time on this one. There we go. We've got this chart courtesy of Fred, the Federal Reserve Board, and what you see here, if I can get this to work, is this part of, that's into the 60s, into the 70s, into the early 80s, where we regularly had north of 10% savings, personal savings rate. And down here, we're down at 3.1 or 3.6% from 5.1% the year before. Not exactly a sustainable GDP growth business model, if you will. Let's go to the main topic in this follow-up video to the one 2 days prior. And I'm going to call it Globalists / the Davos Switzerland crowd. You know, the mighty mucks that gather every, I believe it's January, in Alpine village in Switzerland to talk about how to save the world, or in my book, how to run or rule the world. They appear to be back in full control, which suggests more of the same. Our toxic public policy stew is going to be sustained. How do I mean this? Well, let's start with the U.S. The unexpected for a lot of people, I expected it and bet on it, the election of Donald Trump through the Electoral College. Trump, is effectively being neutered, turned into a lame duck very early in his presidency, thanks to the U.S. deep state and its machinations. And the deep state are the bureaucrats and the CIA and the FBI and the people, the unelected part of the government, if you will, that in effect controls things even though it shouldn't, even though it's unconstitutional. That deep state, which is in cahoots with a leftist media, leftist judges, leftist college campuses, leftist media, and leftist Hollywood, are in effect taking away this man's ability to conduct constitutional duties as the head of the executive branch. And some of those would be for the good. Turning to Europe, we have the British election early this summer, in essence, so watered down Brexit that there might not be any exit from the EU by Britain. And we also had elections in the Netherlands and in France this year, which suggests that rising citizen anxiety or concerns about a loss of national sovereignty, national solvency, tolerance, and Western cultural cohesion have been effectively trumped by the ruling elite that applaud one world government and the continued evisceration of national sovereignty, representative government, and national solvency. In short, quote, the Davos crowd, unquote. Cabal members, such as the BIS, the central bank, the World Bank, the IMF, the central planners, the central bankers, the Paris Accord green cronies, leftist bureaucrats with tenure that are de facto doing the legislating that elected legislative bodies, such as parliaments and congresses, should, chieftains of too big to fail money center banks, and multinationals have effectively usurped representative government and national sovereignty. And these people, these groups, populate this global super elitist cabal. The latest update on the heretofore unstoppable one global government, quote unquote, or Borg, for any of you Star Trek fans, assimilation trajectory is the recent total out-of-the-closet effort by the new French president, Macron, to de facto transfer citizen property rights to non-citizens, be they citizens of Southern Europe or Southern European nations, or to the hordes of developing nation immigrants from Africa and the Middle East, which are severely burdening European budgets and balance sheets. Specifically, Macron is seeking Northern European tech solidarity as financed by, you guessed it, the German government. That is, the industrious German taxpayer. If this isn't setting off any property right alarms, think of it this way. What if U.S. taxpayers, right, in essence the makers, had to assume the $5.6 trillion of unfunded liabilities of state pension funds. How does one spell, quote, lawless redistributionism, unquote, from makers to takers and even to non-citizens? What's the secular upshot of this? Look for a doubling down of fiat money and fiat government, and look to the rise of one world government kleptocracy as free market capitalism, national sovereignty, federalism, or what's left of it, local government, property rights, and individual liberties continue to get hammered, resulting collectively in sustained productivity challenges, or even the negative productivity that it is morphing into, which our disastrous energy policies make worse still. For financial and economic fallout flavor, consider, if you would, the catastrophic leftist / green crony capitalism on display in the German Energiewende, the German energy makeover, which has driven German kilowatt per hour costs through the stratosphere, second only to highest cost Denmark, where they've got a lot of windmills toiling away. And it has resulted in this German Energiewende has resulted in massive taxpayer subsidies to keep German industry from heading for the hills, leaving the country. Or consider the Paris Accord, the rising tailgate CO2 taxes on developed economies, or affordable, vital 24/7 energy availability, which is key to any high value-added economy, any robust GDP output per capita. Luckily, Trump said au revoir to the Paris Accord, which was unconstitutionally signed by President Obama without including the legislative branch, but under which many European consumers, taxpayers, and so-called KMUs, small and mid-sized enterprises, are laboring under. Not exactly a constructive policy framework for maximizing productivity and economic growth and wealth of a society. In the interim, and this is global, increasingly underfunded pension plans, creditors getting stiffed, and insurance shareholders alike continue to suffer the curse of monetary policy, global monetary policy, also called financial repression, which is made for takers, debtors, governments, and for too big to fail financial institutions / cronies, instead of for savers, for pensioners, and for Main Street. For a graphical depiction of the low or zero interest rate policy behind all this, which is ably assisted by QE, which suppresses the long end of the yield curve. Let me see if I can share another graph with you also from the Federal Reserve, their internet arm, which is excellent, by the name of FRET. And what this is going to show is a Federal Reserve rate, the short-term rate that the Fed sets directly, which is off the charts in terms of never having been there, which, if you look at the history of 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and the 00 years, and now into the teens, averaged roughly 4 to 5%. And after 8-9 years of this so-called recovery, we're only at between 1 and 1.25%. And this, in turn, at the longer end, has been double down on in terms of QE, which is very difficult because it means that pensions and insurance companies or their shareholders are going to have a very tough go of it. Let me see if I can show this graph. Give me a bit of time on these as I ramp up. Here is the chart. Here is this progression back here from the 60s. Let me see, I think I have this right. Yes, I do. Actually, from the late 50s. Here we go. I'm going to get better at this. Bear with me. Back here, we're going to arc up from 2.5% all the way up to 15, Volcker, tough love, and then down as we're going now into the zero interest rate policy since '08, and just barely have a blip. So we obviously don't have an interest rates that is conducive to capital formation, savings that is conducive to the solvency of pension funds and insurance companies alike. So the big question is when will Chicago, Illinois, or other bankrupt states or countries that can't print money to cover pension shortfalls have to deal with growing civil unrest or citizen revolts? How long until property and casualty insurance companies, collectively speaking, which are having to raise premiums stoutly to offset lacking investment income thanks to financial repression, ZIRP, NERP, and QE, how long until they lose the ability, the capital, the float, to cover sizable claims when they inevitably occur? Or will they require new taxpayer bailouts? Does AIG ring a bell? And by the way, have you checked into your auto or homeowners or your umbrella insurance premiums of late? Did you forget that there's too little inflation out there? Give me a break. The grapes of financial repression math, or what happens when price discovery is usurped by the central bankers, the central planners, the states. In other words, instead of revisiting sanity, government spending discipline, sound money, which can't be inflated away or given away to takers for makers, to sound citizen-based property rights, same direction, free market capitalism, price discovery, based interest rates, and thus higher productivity, higher growth, the wealth of nations kind of trajectory that we had, it looks like toxic public policies of the global deep state will continue to push us into higher debt levels, more money printing, especially when debt-based deflation hits the fan, or bond and stock purchases. And with it, obviously, lower productivity, lower growth, lower wealth creation, and yield starvation for savers, pensioners, and insurance companies alike, effectively continuing to transfer property rights from Main Street to Wall Street to K Street and to takers that began in earnest when Nixon took America off the dollar gold standard 46 years ago this month of August. Nonetheless, the credibility of global central bank puts is still in place. And most global stocks and bonds are priced for solvency, growth, and price stability perfection, even though the opposite is on offer. What will break investors' confidence in the ability of central banks to artificially inflate stock, bond, and real estate prices, or to backstop them with puts, with financial repression, amidst increasing political, financial, debt beyond belief, and economic, no real GDP growth, weak productivity, all right? I'm going to call it political, financial, and economic degradation in the face of nirvana in bond, stock, and real estate values. How long can this be sustained? We still don't know the answer to that, any more than we know when a patient with blood pressure of 220 over 110 that's been marked as such for the last 5 years, and he's been reprimanded by his GP to do something and fast, else he'll drop dead. That patient with 220 over 110 blood pressure is a walking, ticking time bomb. So is our entire valuation landscape in terms of bonds, stocks, and real estate. And we also know that as much as the global central banks, the central planners, the statists have been levitating bond, stock, and real estate prices through both interest rates and massive, absolutely unequaled, historically unprecedented central bank balance sheet expansions, we know that they've also been de facto collaborators with artificial suppression, downward manipulation in the price of physical precious metals or real money through condoning, looking askance, or even encouraging through their bullion bank members or owners the massive naked short selling that has been going on literally for decades, and of recent vintage where multiple years of gold or silver output are sold in paper format in a naked fashion without the physical inventory to back it up. Our point, investors should consider selling assets that have been manipulated higher and buying assets that have been manipulated lower. We trust that you can connect the dots. That's it from here. Bye-bye.